Welcome back, everybody, to a mock draft Monday, a 7-round Detroit Lions mock draft, including trades, big swings, and interesting new draft strategies. With just 3 weeks to go to the NFL draft, we are going to go over as many prospects and as many draft strategies as possible so that you guys get ready for the up-and-coming NFL draft in Green Bay. So, with that being said, today we have an interesting one. The Detroit Lions trade out of the first round, select a quarterback in the second, and draft the offensive side of the ball far before they address the defensive needs. It's an interesting strategy. It's one that will be hated by many, but I think could work in the Lions' favor long term. So, with that being said, let's get into the trade that eliminates the Lions from day one. That being with the New Orleans Saints, a team that wanted the 28th overall pick and wanted to trade up for an offensive lineman. They had Gray Zabel on their mind, and a player that the Detroit Lions have shown a lot of interest in. However, with a lot of the strength of this class being on day 2 and day 3, being the second to third round players where a lot of that talent and depth is going to come from, acquiring an extra pick on day 2, getting an extra opportunity to get a very similar quality of player as Gray Zabel, I think is a good move for the Lions. Their goal in this draft is to address 1, maybe 2 starting positions and fill out the depth in as quality a fashion as possible. And while they could address it with Gray Zabel in the first round, they could address it with maybe somebody a little bit higher on the grading chart. I think dropping back to 40, getting up 71 as well with the pick in trade terms, I think is more valuable for the Detroit Lions. They can still get a starter at 40, but now they have the opportunity to get another one with 71. And I think if you ask anybody, 2 starters as opposed to 1 at 28 is always going to be a deal that you take if you are in the position of the Detroit Lions. So I made the deal. I traded back to 40, picked up 71, and gave away both 28 and 244. And going on to the 40th overall pick, I have the Detroit Lions selecting Donovan Jackson, the 6'4", 320-pound offensive lineman from The Ohio State University. A player that last year played for both guard and tackle for the Ohio State Buckeyes on their road to a national championship and played it very well. 422 pass blocking snaps, only 5 quarterback hits, and 2 sacks on the season. Donovan Jackson was asked to do more than many offensive linemen are supposed to do. He switched positions in the middle of the year with no practice, no training, no time to prepare, and he did so really about as well as you could expect. Now, being primarily a left guard, that is where he felt most comfortable. That is where I think he will play in the NFL. And if they were to draft him, I think that's where he would go. Maybe continue developing at tackle as well, but I think they already drafted Giovanni Mana to do that, and their biggest need is at the guard position. Back in 2023, when Donovan Jackson was a full-time left guard for the Ohio State Buckeyes, he played in 443 pass blocking snaps, allowing just a single sack and a single quarterback hit on Kyle McCord. This would make the Detroit Lions offensive line not only a very talented unit, but a very deep unit as well. Taylor Decker, of course, would man the starter at left tackle with Graham Glasgow, Frank Ragnow, Christian Mahogany, and Penei Sewell as your starting 5. But when you go into the depth of this roster, I think the backup offensive line is almost more impressive than the starters. Of course, you do have guys like Giovanni Manu and Dan Skipper at the 2 tackle positions, but on the interior, you now have guys like Colby Sorsdale, Coyote Awazika, and Donovan Jackson, 2 of which have started games for the Detroit Lions in big primetime games. And Donovan Jackson, the second-round pick who's a plug-and-play type of starter, he may not beat out Graham Glasgow on day 1, but he is a long-term option, could very well be the starter on day 1 at that left guard position and make the offensive line younger, make them healthier, make them more reliable, and keep this offensive line, especially with Hank Fairley returning, a well-oiled machine that continues to ride through Detroit. Now, I do have the Detroit Lions selecting defense next at 60 overall. I think the Detroit Lions do address the edge rushing position, with a lot of guys in this draft class being question marks at the top and, some really good players in the second round. I felt it was very appropriate to wait for this pick in order to address the defensive line. You get a good quality starter on the offensive line first, and you follow it up with a good starter on defense with Princely Umanmiele, a player that is 6'4", 260 pounds from Ole Miss, transferred from Florida for his final season and was really good, had a career year at Ole Miss and a really good career across his SEC campaign. With 25.5 career sacks and 40 career TFLs, 31 quarterback hits across the last 3 years, and a 91.1 Pro Football Focus grade. Princely is one of the most underrated edge rushers in this class. A player that for a long time was thought of as a fringe first-round pick, isn't quite going to sneak in, but I do think is going to be a good addition to an already very strong Detroit Lions front four. With 11 sacks, 28 pressures, and again, that 91.1 Pro Football Focus rating from a year ago, he's going to be a player that can compete. He's going to be a player that can set the edge with his size and frame. He's a player that has a high enough motor. He's got good bend. He's just an all-around really good quality pass rusher, and really was the last one of the bunch. A lot of the bigger names, a lot of the more impressive tape, maybe like JTT or the Mike Greens, and of course the big names up top like the James Pierce, they were all gone. Donovan Jackson was taken very recently before this pick. So really in the last true second-tier edge rusher, I selected Princely Umanmielen, and I think he can slide in immediately. I think he can be a day one product for the Detroit Lions, and much like Donovan Jackson, maybe he takes a year to fully get where he needs to be, but I think day one can be a quality impact player with some pretty solid room to grow over the next couple of years, really filling out that edge rusher 2 role next to Aiden Hutchinson. Now, what do we do with this 71st overall pick? Well, as controversial as it's going to be, I see this potentially happening if the Lions find themselves in this situation where they pick up an extra second, third round pick, a player on day 2 that they feel can develop into a really quality starter, but a player that doesn't have to start right away. And that is Jalen Milroe, a 6'2", 200-pound quarterback. Somebody that would come into the NFL immediately and be one of the fastest and most athletic quarterbacks at the position in the National Football League. With a 65% career completion percentage, 5,600 passing yards, and almost 1,300 rushing yards, Jalen Milroe, I think, is underrated in this class. 71 career touchdowns to just 17 interceptions, and that's just in his final 2 years. Really, when he was starting, he is a good football player. He is a quality, hardworking, good football player that I think could impact the Detroit Lions immediately in the rushing game and potentially be the developmental quarterback that Brad Holmes is very clearly looking for. I don't believe Hendon Hooker has developed the way that they wanted him to. I don't think he's ever fully recovered from the ACL injury, and I don't think he's going to be the quarterback that they thought they could have in Detroit. So, with his contract being half over, you select Jalen Milroe, you potentially trade Hendon Hooker for a 6th, 7th round pick, get any value you can from the quarterback to salvage him, and you move on. You restart the process. Now, instead of 2 years to develop a quarterback that's almost 30, you have 4 years to develop a quarterback that's only 22 years old. A player that by the end of Jared Goff's contract, and certainly by the time you can afford to get off his contract, will be in the prime of his career, still on his rookie contract. And if it doesn't work, you don't have to force it. Jared Goff is under contract for 4 more seasons. So if Jalen Milroe doesn't work out, you give him 2 years to develop. If he doesn't look the part, doesn't look ready, you don't have confidence, you move on. You draft another quarterback in 2 years. You let Jared Goff play out the remainder of his contract, and you go from there. But I do think finding a quarterback of the future is a priority for this team. I do believe it is something the Lions are trying to keep in mind and trying to do at a high level. They tried it with Hendon Hooker. Obviously didn't work very well. They signed Jared Goff to a long-term extension because they felt that was what was best for the organization. But Jared Goff isn't going to be around forever. Jared Goff won't be around for the next decade, more likely than not. So finding the next quarterback, potentially finding the next great quarterback in the NFL, could be really important for the Detroit Lions. And if Jalen Milroe hits his ceiling, he will be a top 10 quarterback in football. He'll probably be a top 5 quarterback in football. And you put him in a system with a top offensive line, a great receiving duo, an elite run game, a good offense, just all around in general, there isn't a much better supporting cast you could ask for a young quarterback. You give him 2 years to develop, and you could find something very, very special in the Alabama product. Now, before day 2 ends with pick 102, I do have the Lions selecting Alfred Collins, 6'5", 320-pound defensive tackle from Texas with a little bit of versatility to play outside. He had 7 career sacks and 18 TFLs, 12 passes defended, an interception, and a forced fumble. He's a little quicker than you would expect from guys of his size. He's got the exact amount of power you want from your defensive tackle. He has versatility on the defensive line, and I think him matched up with Princely Umanmielen would be a really good duo to come out of the NFL draft with two guys that are solid second to third round type of grades, players that can immediately impact your roster with room to grow. I think both of them are very solid prospects, very good players, and could very much impact the team early and exactly the way that the Detroit Lions have been needing. On top of that, they of course add pretty significant depth to an already very deep defensive tackle group. It would give them about 6 players that you really trust to put on the field. And for edge rusher, it would give them a little bit more versatility, a player that can set the edge, and a player that very similarly to Levi Onwuzurike can play inside, can play outside, and may not put up monstrous numbers, but is a player you know you can rely on in a pinch and when things start to get serious. So moving on to day 3, the Detroit Lions going back to the defensive line, selecting Savion Jones, a 6'6", 280-pound edge rusher, the ideal defensive end for Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell. They like their big guys. They like their heavy guys, very much in the mold of a Marcus Davenport, but healthy. Savion Jones has 11.5 career sacks and 18 career TFLs with 3 forced fumbles and a fumble recovery. He is power over finesse. He sets the edge really well. He's a great run defender, has a high motor, and even though he doesn't get to the quarterback as often as you may like to see, he is a good 3-down defensive lineman. And that is what the Detroit Lions value. That is where they like to put their chips, is on the players that can be on the field all 3 downs and really can be a player they can rely on in any given situation. Savion Jones reminds me a lot of what the Lions have right now in Josh Paschal, a good run defender, somebody that can get you 2.5, 3 sacks a season and be just a quality, solid rotational piece that can play if needed and rotate in when everybody is healthy. I don't think Savion Jones will ever turn into a star in Detroit, but I think a rotational player in the day 3 of the NFL draft at pick 130 is more than appropriate for what you're spending the capital on. And I think Savion Jones is more than that for the Detroit Lions this year. At pick 196, the Lions move to the secondary, selecting Maxon Hook, the 5th-year senior from Toledo, Ohio, a player that over his career has 356 career tackles, 15 passes defended, 7 interceptions, 2 forced fumbles, 2 fumble recoveries, and 8 tackles for loss. He is a playmaker in the MAC, and the reason he's going so low is he played in the MAC. He is an older prospect. He was in college for 5 years playing at the University of Toledo. But when you're taking a look at the 196th pick, there's 60 selections left. You're well into the 6th round of the NFL draft. You can take a flyer. You can take a player that has some potential to grow. I think at his ceiling, he's a player that can turn into a good, really good safety 3, a rotational player, somebody you can rely upon if needed, if Kirby needs a rest or if Brian needs a rest, or if there are, God forbid, more injuries on the secondary and in the defense. I think he's a player that you can rely on. He does have good enough instincts. He does have good range. He does have just a good mindset for the safety position while being a good size for it. And at worst case scenario, he comes in as a 6th round pick, as a quality special teamer, as a special teams ace, maybe even a special teams captain one day, and a player that just turns into a really good football player for Dan Campbell and the Lions. And then at the last pick, in the 6th round, I have Jacob Gideon, a 6'2", 295-pound center from Western Michigan, a player that was a 2-time first-team All-MAC player, a second-team All-American last season with the Western Michigan Broncos. He is a little bit undersized, but in the 6th round, 7th round, you're getting a player with high upside who's succeeded at the Division I level, a player that, may not play, may never make the roster, but a player that, just like Christian Mahogany, could potentially go a little higher, may fall in the NFL draft because of his size, because of some other concerns. And I think if you get a quality of player like Jacob Gideon in the 7th round of the NFL draft, you're doing pretty good value-wise. It gives you a strong offensive lineman. It fills out that roster spot for the preseason. It lets him compete with Kingsley Eguakon from Florida from a year ago. And I think it's a good draft pick overall. So that is my draft class. It is a unique one for sure. Drafting guard early is something that a lot of people are on board with, but not everybody will be. Jalen Milroe would be a huge controversy if it were to come true. 3 defensive linemen, a lot of trench players, and a lot of really quality, good football players. So that is my take. That is the mock draft for now. We'll come back with another one next week, of course, with a different drafting strategy and a different look at how Brad Holmes may approach it. But For now, let me know your comments down below. Do you agree with the draft? Do you disagree? Please drop your grades down below. Let me know. Do you like one player, not another? Grade each pick, grade the draft overall. I'd love to hear everything you have to say. But with that being said, thank you all so much for watching. With that being said, thank you all so much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions.